Hey everybody, how are you? I wanted to show you something called the Phillips Curve. We're going to go over it in review as well, but I wanted to just make this quick video so you guys could have a reference point for it if you wanted to take a look at it again outside of class time or outside of review time. So just to sort of set up our context here, what we have is we have an economy shown with the Keynesian model on the left, and that Keynesian model is in full employment equilibrium as we speak, and we are going to then show what a full employment scenario looks like on a Phillips curve and show what happens with a Phillips curve when the economy changes in the real economy model. So if we note this price level here, our price level is our vertical axis. Another way you can think about price level is you can think of it in terms of inflation. So changes in price level are exactly changes in the inflation rate. So this would just simply be the percentage change of this price level, okay? And on this axis, we know that we have national output, or real GDP. Well, a correlation to national output and real GDP that we've talked about in class is the idea that employment levels will change with changes in real GDP. Recessions lead to unemployment, and inflationary gaps lead to greater levels of employment. And so what we find along here, along our Phillips curve axis, is we find the unemployment rate. And in the Keynesian model from the 1930s up until the 1970s, just like we talked about, it was always assumed that inflation and unemployment were simple trade-offs. If you get more of one, you get less of the other. And so that was sort of the way that the Phillips curve was developed, was this concept that it fit really nicely with the Keynesian model. And you can notice in some ways that the short-run aggregate supply curve and the short-run Phillips curve are opposites, okay? And you will notice that the long-run aggregate supply curve, or our full employment, goes along with what's called the long-run Phillips curve, which comes down here to give us something called the NRU. And the NRU is the natural rate of unemployment. And we'll get a little deeper into this in our next unit, but the natural rate of unemployment is the idea that at any given time in the economy, there's always going to be people that are in between jobs. Some people who have been laid off and looking for another job, some people who have voluntarily chosen to get another job, that kind of thing, okay? So the natural rate of unemployment has historically been thought to be somewhere around 3 to 4%. We're having challenges with that right now because we're not sure exactly where the natural rate of unemployment is. It's always been sort of guesswork, all right? So let's change something on our graph and let's show alternatives and see what happens with respect to our new world, okay? So I'm going to put our real economy model into a recession by shifting the aggregate demand curve to the left. So this is a demand side recession. There's our new demand curve, and we can think of a series of reasons why that might happen. And that will give us a new level of national income and a lower price level. So we have our recessionary gap noted right there, and we have a lowering price level, all right? Now, if we were to think, what is going to happen in this particular case with unemployment and inflation? Well, our recessionary gap is going to create excess unemployment. We're going to get more unemployed human beings. And our inflation rate should drop because inflation rates and price levels are analogous. So let's draw this over. And lo and behold, what do we find? A lower inflation rate. And if I go over to the short-run Phillips curve, I see that we have an increased unemployment rate and a decreased rate of inflation. And so when you slide along the aggregate demand curve, or slide along the short-run aggregate supply curve, you're going to slide along the short-run Phillips curve. And so this is an indication that there is simply a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, which was always the thought when we thought of the world of Keynesian economics. Let's take a look at what an inflationary gap on the demand side might create, okay? So here we are. Let's give ourselves an inflationary gap. There's another aggregate demand curve. Let's identify our short-run equilibrium right there. And there is our new level of national income and our new price level. And once again, all we did was slide along the short-run aggregate supply curve, in which case we know that we have an increased price level, and since we're producing a greater than full employment level of national income, then we should see lowering levels of unemployment. So, come over. Here's our inflation rate. We can see that it's increased. I hit the short-run Phillips curve, and we can see that our unemployment rate has moved leftward or decreased, okay? So, increased levels of inflation, decreased levels of unemployment, and there is that Keynesian trade-off that was always thought of with the short-run Phillips curve. All right, so that is sort of the functional version of a slide of aggregate demand along a short-run aggregate supply curve and movements of a Phillips curve. All right, I'm going to put together a second video very quickly that basically explains what happens when we see a movement of short-run aggregate supply or long-run aggregate supply. So part one is movements of the aggregate demand curve and how that impacts. Okay, be right back.